I want to be clear about something before I start. I'm not telling you this because I want forgiveness. I'm telling you this because someone should know what happened on Vareth 7, and the only people who were there are either dead, classified, or me. And I don't plan on being classified much longer. My name is Connell Rask, service number 990-17-Kilo, diagnosed antisocial personality disorder, secondary psychopathy with blunted affect. That's what the file says. What the file doesn't say is that I scored a 38 on the PCL-R, which made the evaluator go quiet for about 11 seconds before she wrote something in red ink. I watched her do it. I counted the seconds. I count a lot of things. It's how I process the world, not through feelings, but through measurements. They pulled me out of Adrastea Penal Station on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because the commissary had fish, and I'd been marking days by the meals. 612 days into a life sentence, not for anything dramatic. I killed a man in a supply depot on Callisto because he tried to take something that was mine. It was a protein bar. I told them at the tribunal that I understood the punishment was disproportionate to the catalyst. They wrote that down too. The woman who came for me wore a uniform I didn't recognize. No branch insignia, no name tape, just a gray suit with a collar cut too sharp for standard military and boots that had never touched mud. Connell Rask? You already know my name. I need verbal confirmation for the record. Then yes, Connell Rask, what's this about? She placed a tablet on the table between us. On it was a single document. The header read, Terran Emergency Acquisitions Authority, Provisional Conscription Ordered, Deep Contact Theater. You're being activated, she said. I'm a prisoner. I wasn't military. You are now. She explained it in the corridor, walking fast enough that I had to adjust my stride, which I think was deliberate for control technique. I noted it and let her have it. We passed through 3 security bulkheads, each one heavier than the last, each one sealing behind us with a sound like a coffin lid. Earth was losing a war. I didn't know there was a war. Most people didn't. The Dominion of the Vareth, that's what the briefing materials called them, had pushed through the colonial buffer zone 11 months ago and burned 4 settlements to bedrock. Standard military response had failed. Not because our troops were cowards. Because the Vareth didn't fight the way our troops were trained to expect. They were perfect. That was the word she used. Perfect. Their formations were mathematically optimal. Their reaction times were neurologically impossible for unaugmented beings. Their tactical withdrawals were synchronized to the microsecond. Every human strategist who'd faced them described the same experience. It was like playing chess against something that had already seen the board. We need people who don't play chess, she said. What do you need? People who flip the board. That was when I understood. They didn't want soldiers. Soldiers follow doctrine. Soldiers respond to training, hierarchy, and the rational calculus of risk and reward. Every soldier Earth sent against the Vareth had behaved the way soldiers behave, and the Vareth had eaten them alive because the Vareth were better at being soldiers than anything humanity had ever produced. So Earth went shopping in its darkest drawer. There were 9 of us. They put us in a converted cargo bay on a fast frigate called the Harrow, fitting name, though I doubt anyone in procurement had a sense of irony. The bay had been divided into individual cells with transparent walls so we could see each other but not touch. Like specimens in a lab, which of course is what we were. I cataloged the others within the first 20 minutes. Cell 2 was a woman named Marin Hask, former colonial ranger. She'd killed 11 people over a period of 6 years on the European ice stations, all of them co-workers, all of them by methods that looked like accidents until someone ran the statistics. She was small, barely 160 centimeters, with the kind of face that made people want to help her. That was her instrument. She'd never once been suspected by anyone who actually knew her. Only an algorithm caught the pattern. Cell 3 was Dax Solino. He was enormous. Former dock worker, then enforcer for a supply cartel in the belt. His diagnosis was different from mine: intermittent explosive disorder layered over what the evaluators called profound empathic vacancy. He'd once beaten a man to death with a fire extinguisher during an argument about a docking clamp. He didn't remember doing it. He remembered being annoyed, and then he remembered being tired, and the space between those 2 memories contained 17 fractures. Cell 4 held someone whose file I never got to read because the tablet glitched. a thin, pale individual who never spoke a word in transit. They spent the entire trip staring at the wall directly in front of them, occasionally moving their lips as if counting. I watched them for hours. They never blinked at the intervals you'd expect. Cells 5 through 9 held variations on the same theme. A pyromaniac from the Titan refineries, a former interrogation specialist who'd been court-martialed for exceeding parameters, the official language for torture so inventive that it genuinely frightened the people who'd authorized it, a woman who smiled constantly and had once opened an airlock on a civilian transport to settle what she described as a noise complaint, a man who spoke 4 languages and had strangled his cellmate up with a sock for a reason he described as spatial, and a 17-year-old I found out later he'd been aged up in the system who had done something on Mars that the file simply described as incident with no further detail, which was the most frightening entry of all. Our handler was Captain Leon Vasic, and she was the first military professional I'd met who didn't try to hide her fear of us behind authority. She was afraid. She let us see it. And she functioned anyway, which earned her something from me that I rarely give anyone. Attention. Here's what you need to know, she said on day 2, standing outside the cells with her hands clasped behind her back. The Vareth Dominion has taken Vareth 7. It's a mining colony. Had about 4,000 civilians before the occupation. We believe approximately 800 are still alive at being held in the primary extraction complex. She paused. Measured us. Continued. Every conventional rescue operation has been modeled and rejected. The Vareth garrison is approximately 1,200 soldiers supported by automated defense networks that adapt to incoming tactical patterns within 90 seconds. Our war colleges estimate that a standard assault force would need a 4-to-1 numerical advantage and would sustain 70% casualties. We don't have the numbers. We don't have the time. So you're sending us, Marin said. She said it sweetly, like she was accepting a dinner invitation. I'm sending you because every model we have is built on the assumption that attackers will behave rationally. Vasic's jaw tightened. You are the least rational people the Terran consolidation could find. Dax laughed. It was a sound like gravel in a turbine. Rules of engagement, I said. Vasic looked at me. What are our rules of engagement, Captain? She held my gaze for 4 full seconds. I counted. Complete the objective. Retrieve the civilians. Everything else is at your discretion. Everything? Mr. Rask, if I thought limiting you would help, I would. But the people who authorized this operation understand that the entire point of sending you is to not limit you. So yes, everything. The thin person in cell 4 stopped staring at the wall and turned to look at Vasic for the first time. They smiled. It was the worst smile I have ever seen, and I have seen mine in a mirror. I need to explain the Vareth because otherwise what happened on the ground won't make sense. The Vareth Dominion is a eusocial civilization. Not like ants, that's the lazy analogy everyone reaches for. More like a vast, distributed intelligence where individual units maintain full autonomy but share a predictive behavioral framework that functions almost like telepathy. They don't read minds, they read patterns. Every Vareth soldier continuously models the behavior of every entity in their perceptual field and updates those models in real time. If you feint left, they know you're going right before your weight shifts. If you set an ambush, they identify it by the absence of data, the silence where sound should be. If you form a strategy, they unravel it by mapping the logical structure that generated it. They had conquered 11 species this way. Every single one of those species had militaries, doctrines, hierarchies, rational command structures. The Vareth mapped the rationality, predicted the behavior, and dismantled it with surgical patience. They were not cruel. This is important. The Vareth were not sadistic. They were efficient. They occupied worlds the way a surgeon removes a tumor precisely, without passion, with absolute confidence in the procedure. The civilians on Vareth 7 were alive because alive prisoners were more administratively useful than dead ones. There was no malice in the Vareth, just the total terrifying certainty of a species that had never encountered anything it couldn't predict. Our briefing materials included combat footage from the failed operations. I watched a platoon of 40 Terran Marines walk into a kill zone that the Vareth had arranged in the 14 seconds between the Marines' deployment and their first tactical decision. 14 seconds. The Vareth had watched them exit the dropship, modeled their formation, predicted their route, and positioned a crossfire that killed 31 of them before anyone could give an order. The surviving 9 retreated in a pattern the Vareth had also predicted. They were allowed to leave, not out of mercy, because the Vareth had calculated that fleeing survivors would transmit demoralizing telemetry to the fleet, which would delay the next assault by a statistically useful number of hours. I watched that footage 3 times. Then I asked Vasek for the Vareth's physiological data. They were bipedal, slightly taller than humans, 4-fingered and with a joint structure optimized for precision rather than power. Their sensory array was broader than ours. They saw into the infrared, heard subsonic frequencies, and had a chemoreceptive organ along their jawline that could detect hormonal states in other biological organisms. They could smell your adrenaline, they could smell your fear. I thought about that for a long time. What happens, I asked Vasek quietly, when someone doesn't produce the right chemicals? She stared at me. When someone walks into a kill zone and their body doesn't do what a body is supposed to do. No adrenaline spike, no cortisol surge, no fear markers at all. What does their model do with that? Vasek didn't answer, but I saw her swallow. That was when I knew why they'd really chosen us. We dropped in dark. No transponder, no formation, no tactical telemetry linking us to the fleet. 9 individual pods, each one a coffin-sized ceramic shell designed to ablate on entry and hit the ground looking like debris. The Vareth scanned for military signatures, organized deployment patterns, synchronized descent vectors, communication handshakes. We gave them none of that. We were just 9 pieces of junk falling out of the sky at slightly different angles. I hit hard enough to crack a rib. Didn't matter. Pain is information, and the information was, you're alive, you're on the ground, move. Vareth 7 was a gray world. Iron oxide dust over basalt, thin atmosphere, sky the color of a bruise. The mining colony was in a valley between 2 ridges, a sprawl of prefab structures centered on the extraction complex, a massive, ugly thing like a metal fist punched into the earth. The Vareth had set up their garrison in concentric rings around it. Classic occupation architecture, predictive fields of fire, drone patrols on algorithmic schedules. I had memorized those schedules, not because I was ordered to, because patterns are what I do. Marin reached the rally point first. She'd landed closest, moving through a drainage culvert with the kind of quiet that made me reconsider my assessment of her as merely social predator type. She was operationally gifted. When she saw me, she didn't greet me. She just held up 4 fingers. 4 others had checked in on the local mesh. Dax arrived 20 minutes late, bleeding from a gash on his forearm where his pod had split wrong. He was grinning. Dax always grinned when he bled. Something about the feedback loop. By nightfall, Vareth 7's night was 19 hours long, a gift from the orbital mechanics 7 of us had gathered. The pyromaniac, whose name was Torin, had landed in the wrong grid square and was making his own way. The pale person from Cell 4, we'd started calling them Ghost, had simply appeared at the rally point without anyone seeing them arrive or hearing them approach. They were already sitting when Marin got there. 2 of us hadn't checked in. The kid from Mars and the noise complaint woman. We never found the kid's pod. The woman's pod we found on day 3, intact, sealed, with her inside it. She'd hit at the wrong angle and the inertial dampener had failed. The kinetic force had done what kinetic force does. 7 operatives, 1,200 Vareth soldiers, 800 civilian hostages, and no plan, because plans were the thing the Vareth ate for breakfast. So what do we do? Torin asked. He was fidgeting with his hands. Torin always fidgeted. His fingers moved like he was building something invisible. Whatever we want, I said. That's the point. And it was. That was the entire operational doctrine, though calling it a doctrine insults the concept. We had no coordinated strategy. We had no synchronized timeline. We had no shared tactical framework. Each of us was given a single objective: retrieve the civilians, and absolute freedom in how we pursued it. 7 predators, 1 hunting ground, no leashes. I should have felt something about what came next. I know that. I'm aware that the appropriate human response to what I'm about to describe involves horror, guilt, or at minimum discomfort. I'm telling you now that I experienced none of those things at the time. I experienced focus. I experienced a deep, calm,
crystalline clarity that I have only ever found in two contexts: violence and the moments just before it. This is what I am. I am not asking you to be comfortable with it.
Marin went first, not because anyone told her to, because that was Marin. She tested the water before anyone else, not out of bravery but out of a predator's need to understand the environment on her own terms. She walked into the outer perimeter at 0300 local time. Just walked. No tactical approach. No cover-to-cover movement. She put on a torn civilian jacket she'd found in the debris field, smeared dust on her face, and shuffled toward the nearest Vareth checkpoint like a dazed survivor. The Vareth sentries detected her immediately, their models engaged. A lone civilian, distressed, approaching from the waste field. Behavioral prediction: surrender, collapse, or flight. Hormonal signature: elevated but consistent with exhaustion and fear. Except it wasn't fear. Marin could produce stress hormones on command, a quirk of her neurology that had made her undetectable for 6 years. She wore fear like a costume. Underneath it, her heart rate was 62 beats per minute. They let her approach to within 3 meters, standard processing distance. One sentry moved forward to restrain her while the other maintained overwatch. Protocol. Marin killed the forward sentry with a ceramic blade she'd fabricated from her pod's heat shielding. The strike entered below the Vareth's chemoreceptive organ, the one that smelled emotions and severed what their physiology used for a brainstem. The sentry dropped without a sound. The Overwatch sentry's model broke. I was watching from 200 meters away through a salvaged optic, and I saw it happen. Saw the momentary freeze, maybe a quarter of a second, maybe less, where the Vareth's predictive engine encountered data that didn't fit any existing pattern. Civilian-typed entity, fear-hormoned, suddenly producing zero fear and executing a killing technique with surgical precision. Quarter of a second. That was what a broken model looked like. Marin used that quarter second to close the distance. The Overwatch sentry died reaching for its sidearm. 2 Vareth soldiers dead in under 4 seconds, and the garrison's network didn't flag it as a combat event because the behavioral signature didn't match combat. It matched an anomaly. The system categorized it as a wildlife incident and queued it for review. Marin vanished back into the dust. That was when I understood something fundamental about our advantage. The Vareth didn't just predict behavior. They depended on prediction. Their entire military architecture was optimized for modeling rational actors. Take away the rationality and the architecture didn't just fail, it misinterpreted. It actively generated wrong answers because its confidence in its own modeling meant it would always find some pattern to assign, even when the true answer was that there was no pattern at all. We weren't invisible to them. We were worse. We were noise they kept mistaking for signal. Over the next 3 nights, we dismantled their outer ring, not in coordination. That's what I need you to understand. 7 people operating independently, on their own schedules, using their own methods for their own reasons. The only shared element was the objective: get to the civilians. Everything else was personal. Torin set fires. Not strategically, or rather not in any strategy a rational analyst would recognize. He burned things because burning things was what Torin was. But the effect was tactical chaos. He'd ignite a supply cache, then ignore the response entirely and set fire to something else a kilometer away that had no military value whatsoever. A rock formation, a derelict vehicle. Once an actual pile of dirt that he'd somehow made flammable. The Vareth's pattern recognition system tied itself in knots trying to find the logic. It assigned resources to protect high-value targets. Torin burned low-value ones. It repositioned to cover the apparent arc of movement. Torin moved in a direction that bore no relationship to any previous direction. The interrogation specialist, her name was Pell, and she never told us her first name did something I still don't fully understand. She captured a Vareth patrol leader alive, which should have been impossible given their squad cohesion protocols. She kept it alive for 9 hours. When she was done, she released it back to the garrison. Whatever she had done to it, the patrol leader's subsequent behavior disrupted 3 adjacent units. The Vareth pulled it from the line and attempted to recalibrate its psychological baseline. They couldn't. Pell had found something in the Vareth psyche and broken it with a precision that I would have admired if admiration were something I experienced the way you do. I don't, but I recognize the craftsmanship. Dax killed a 5-soldier patrol by walking directly into them and attacking with his hands. No weapon, no cover, no plan. He simply saw them, felt whatever Dax felt when he saw something that needed to be unalive, and went. 3 of them died before they completed their threat assessment cycle. The other 2 fired on him. 1 shot hit his shoulder. He beat them to death with the shoulder still bleeding. The Vareth network flagged that as a combat event, but the behavioral analysis made no sense to them. A single attacker, unarmored, unarmed, charging a 5-unit patrol with no tactical advantage. The model suggested mental impairment, damaged soldier, suicidal last stand. But Dax walked away, and the model didn't have a category for that. Ghost did things none of us saw. We'd find Vareth dead in locked rooms, equipment disabled in areas none of us had entered. Once a security node simply went offline, and when a Vareth technician arrived to repair it, they found every cable inside the housing had been cut, not severed by a tool, but carefully individually disconnected at the junction points, as if someone had sat in the dark for hours and taken the system apart by touch. I don't know what Ghost was. I never figured it out. They moved through the world like a rumor. And me? I watched. For 3 days, I watched. I observed the Vareth response patterns. I noted the timing of their adaptation cycles, how long it took them to recategorize an anomaly, how they redistributed resources, which units they pulled from static defense to reinforce threatened sectors. I mapped the gaps, not the physical ones, the cognitive ones, the spaces in their understanding where our behavior had torn holes. On the 4th night, I walked through one of those holes and into the extraction complex. The complex was a cathedral of rust and iron, massive bore shafts descending into the planet's crust, connected by a lattice of catwalks, processing floors, and habitation blocks that the colonists had built into the superstructure like barnacles on a hull. The Vareth had consolidated the surviving civilians into Habitation Block 7, the deepest, most defensible section. 800 people in a space designed for 200. I moved through the upper levels like something that belonged there, not sneaking, not hiding, moving with the calm, purposeful gait of someone who had a right to be exactly where they were. The Vareth sentries I passed registered my presence, modeled me, and here's the thing, couldn't resolve the model. I wasn't afraid, I wasn't aggressive, I wasn't fleeing, hiding, or surrendering. I was walking through their occupied territory with the biochemical signature of someone taking a mild stroll. Their chemoreceptors screamed wrong, but their behavioral models said irrelevant. No threat pattern detected. I had 17 minutes before the next patrol cycle. I spent 4 of them finding a maintenance shaft that led to the habitation block's ventilation system. I spent 2 of them disabling the sensor node at the junction. I spent 11 of them in the ventilation duct, in the dark, listening. 800 people, breathing, whispering, crying. Children, the elderly, the sounds of humans being held by something they didn't understand. I dropped into a utility corridor behind the block's rear wall. There was a maintenance door with a Vareth electronic lock. I had a bypass tool Vasic had included in my drop kit. It took 90 seconds. The door opened into a storage room adjacent to the main habitation space. Through the wall, I could hear them. Through a cracked seam in the prefab paneling, I could see them. They were sitting on the floor. Hundreds of people sitting on industrial flooring under strip lighting, surrounded by Vareth guards who stood at the perimeter like statues. The guards didn't move, didn't pace, didn't fidget. They stood at mathematically optimized positions that gave them coverage of the entire space, and they stood with the absolute stillness of beings who had no anxiety about their control. Among the civilians, I saw a woman holding 2 children against her body. Both children were asleep. She was not. She was staring at nothing with the expression I've seen on the faces of people who have been afraid for so long that the fear has become architecture. Load-bearing, structural, the thing holding them upright, because if it left, there'd be nothing else. I felt nothing. I want to say that clearly. I looked at that woman and her children, and I felt nothing. No compassion, no outrage, no tender human impulse to protect the innocent. Those circuits don't exist in me. They were never installed, or they were installed and broke, or they were ripped out so early that I have no memory of their function. What I felt was something else. I felt, these are mine now, not in the way you might feel it. Not love, not duty, not empathy, ownership.
The same thing I'd felt about the protein bar on Callisto. These people were inside my operational perimeter. They were part of my task, and I don't let anyone take what's mine. I know that's monstrous. I know the distinction between protecting someone out of love and protecting them out of territorial possession is the distinction between a guardian and a predator. I know which one I am. But the woman and her children didn't care about the distinction. They needed to not be in that room. And I was the thing that was going to make that happen. My reasons were irrelevant. Only my actions mattered. Isn't that what your philosophers say? That morality lives in the deed, not the intention? No. I don't actually care what your philosophers say. I'm stalling. Because what happened next is the part I don't know how to tell, and I've never not known how to tell a story before. I always know. I always have the words. This part took the words away. I want to tell you about Vareth Commander Osul 3. I never learned the name until after. During the event itself, Osul 3 was simply the one in charge, the Vareth officer coordinating garrison defense from the extraction complex's command center, 2 levels above the habitation block. Osul 3 was, by every metric I could observe, brilliant. In the 4 days since our insertion, Osul 3 had done something no Vareth commander in the briefing files had done, adapted without a model. When the predictive systems failed to categorize our behavior, most Vareth officers escalated, requesting additional processing from the Dominion's distributed intelligence network, feeding more data into models that kept returning errors. Osul 3 did the opposite. Osul 3 started ignoring the models. I learned this from their communication logs, which Ghost had somehow intercepted and routed to our mesh network. While other Vareth units were chasing phantom patterns, Osul 3 had pulled the inner garrison to static defense, abandoned all patrols outside the complex perimeter, and consolidated around the one thing that mattered: the hostages. Osul 3 had realized, faster than any Vareth before, that they were not facing a military force. They were facing something outside the framework. And rather than keep trying to force us into the framework, Osul 3 had made a decision that was, and I do not use this word lightly, creative. Osul 3 had turned the hostages into a fortress. The Vareth guards in the habitation block were not just guards, they were triggers. Each one was linked to a dead man system. If a guard's biometric signature went offline, the atmospheric processors in the habitation block would vent to exterior. 800 people, explosive decompression, 4 seconds. If the command center lost contact with the block for more than 90 seconds, same result. If Osul 3's own cardiac rhythm flatlined, same result. The hostages were wired to their captors' heartbeats. I sat in that utility corridor and I processed this information. And for the first time in the operation, I experienced something that I can only describe as the edge of an emotion. Not the emotion itself, the edge of it, like standing at the rim of a canyon and sensing the depth without looking down. I think it was frustration. I'm not sure. It might have been respect. Osul 3 had done something I hadn't anticipated. They had looked at the chaos we'd created and instead of trying to solve it had simply changed the terms. It didn't matter if they couldn't predict us. It didn't matter if we were irrational, unreadable, impossible to model. Because now, any action we took against the garrison would kill the people we were there to save. Checkmate by hostage. And it was elegant. I'll give Osul 3 that. It was the most elegant defensive adaptation I've ever seen. And I've spent my life studying how things protect themselves from things like me. I pulled back to the maintenance shaft and opened the mesh. "We have a problem," I said. The 7 of us convened in a collapsed mining tunnel 300 meters from the complex. It was the first time we'd all been in the same space since landfall, and the energy was exactly what you'd imagine. A room full of apex predators who were barely tolerating each other's presence. I explained the dead man system. Torrin's response was to suggest we burn the entire complex and sort it out after. Dax said nothing. He was picking at his shoulder wound, which had begun to close in a way that suggested either extraordinary genetics or something the prison doctors had done to him that wasn't in his file. Pell asked 3 precise questions about the dead man's technical specifications, and then went quiet in a way that meant she was thinking, and Pell's thinking was the most dangerous process I'd ever witnessed. Ghost sat in the corner and looked at me, just looked, with an expression that I eventually understood was waiting for me to solve it, because apparently at some point in the past 4 days, these 6 broken, devastating people had decided I was the one who did the thinking. I didn't want to be in charge. Being in charge meant being responsible, and responsibility is a concept I understand intellectually, but experience as weight without purpose. Someone gives you a task, fine. That's a transaction. Someone gives you people. That's something else. But I was the one who'd mapped the garrison. I was the one who'd found the dead man system. And I was the one who understood, in my particular cold and stripped-down way, what OSL 3 had actually done. The system is built on a logic, I said. Every guard's heartbeat is a key that keeps the lock shut. Kill the guards, you open the lock, everyone dies. The Vareth commander has made the rational calculation that we won't sacrifice the objective to eliminate the garrison. So it's a logic problem, Marin said. Yes. And we're here because we don't do logic. I looked at her. She was smiling. That terrible, beautiful, empty smile. No, I said. We're here because we do a different logic. The plan I assembled wasn't a plan. It was 7 separate actions taken by 7 separate people at 7 separate times, for 7 separate reasons that, together, would produce an outcome none of them individually intended. I couldn't coordinate these people. You can't coordinate psychopaths. We don't synchronize. We don't subsume our impulses into a collective strategy. That's the entire reason we were there, because the Vareth couldn't predict us. So I didn't try to make us predictable to each other. I gave each person a single piece of information, a different piece, and told them to do whatever they wanted with it. I told Torin where the atmospheric processor's fuel intake was. I told Dax where OSL 3's command center was. I told Marin which guards were stationed nearest the children. I told Pell what frequency the dead man system used. I told Ghost nothing, because Ghost didn't need to be told anything. And I told the spatial strangler his name was Voss, and I've been avoiding talking about him because Voss disturbed even me. I told Voss where the communication relay was. Then I went back inside the complex alone. There's a saying I once read in a philosophy text someone left in the Adrastea library. A broken clock is right twice a day. 7 broken clocks, all keeping different wrong times, will occasionally, purely by the mathematics of chaos, produce a moment where several of them align in a configuration that no clockmaker would ever design, but that tells, for one instant, a truth that no working clock could express. That's what happened on the 5th night. I don't know the order of everything. I know my part. I know the parts I directly observed. The rest I've reconstructed from the operation's aftermath, the sensor logs we recovered, and the things Marin told me before she stopped talking to anyone permanently. Pell hit the dead man frequency first. She didn't disable it, she couldn't. But she introduced a 3-second latency into the signal relay between the guard's biometric transmitters and the atmospheric processor's trigger. 3 seconds. In the Vareth's framework, 3 seconds was an eternity of uncertainty. The system would still fire, but it would fire 3 seconds late. Torin set fire to the atmospheric processor's fuel intake, not to destroy it. Torin was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He burned just enough to trigger the emergency suppression system, which flooded the intake with inert gas, which meant the processor couldn't vent even if the dead man triggered, because the venting mechanism needed combustion pressure that was now chemically impossible. 3 seconds of latency, and a suffocated trigger. The dead man was functionally dead, but the Vareth didn't know it yet. Their system still showed green. The guards' heartbeats were still broadcasting. The link to OSL 3's command center was still active. Voss hit the communication relay. I don't know how he got to it. The relay was in a hardened installation on the complex's roof, guarded by a 4-unit team. Voss went in and the relay went down, and the 4-unit team was found later arranged in a pattern that the forensic analysts described as geometric. I didn't ask. I don't want to know what Voss considered art. With the relay down, OSL 3 lost contact with the Dominion's distributed intelligence network. For the first time since the occupation began, the garrison was operating on local processing alone. No hive, no backup models, no species-wide predictive assistance. OSL 3 was alone in their own head. Dax hit the command center. I knew he would because I'd told him where it was, and Dax didn't possess the cognitive architecture to do anything with that information except go there and break things. He came through the wall, literally through the prefab wall, which was not designed to withstand 120 kilograms of enraged human moving at a full sprint. But OSL 3 was ready for Dax. Because Osel 3 was brilliant, remember? And brilliance doesn't need a hive network. Osel 3 had predicted that the most physically aggressive attacker would target the command center and had prepared accordingly. When Dax came through the wall, he hit a concussive charge that threw him back 5 meters and ruptured something in his left leg. Dax went down, and Osel 3 stood over him with a weapon drawn, and for a moment the Vareth commander had won. Except Dax was laughing. On the ground, leg bent wrong, probably concussed, bleeding from his ears, Dax was laughing. Not in pain, not in delirium. Laughing because something in his broken wiring found the situation genuinely funny. He'd been blown through a wall and he thought it was hilarious. Osel 3 hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. The chemoreceptors were flooding data. This creature on the ground was injured, defeated, immobilized, and its biochemistry was producing the markers of joy. Not defiance, not mania, joy. The pure, childlike neurological signature of someone having the time of their life. The model broke. Not the computer model. Osel 3's own model. The one that lived in their mind. The one that had been built over a lifetime of predicting behavior, understanding cause and effect, mapping stimulus to response. Dax was the thing that model could not hold. In those 2 seconds, Marin came through the door behind Osel 3. I don't know if she killed the commander. I wasn't there. I know Osel 3 was not among the survivors, and I know Marin had the commander's sidearm when I saw her next. Draw your own conclusions. I was in the habitation block. When the dead man signal stuttered 3 seconds of silence where there should have been continuous broadcast, the Vareth guards in the block did something I hadn't predicted. They didn't open fire. They didn't execute the hostages. They turned inward. Every guard in the room oriented toward their own squad leader, seeking instruction, seeking the model, seeking the pattern that would tell them what to do. For 3 seconds, 800 humans were unwatched. I was already moving. I came out of the utility corridor at a run, not a tactical advance, a flat-out maximum effort sprint across 20 meters of open floor, carrying 2 weapons I'd taken from dead Vareth sentries over the previous 4 days. I am not a physically impressive person. I am lean, average height, unremarkable in every way that matters in a fight. But I was also the only person in that room whose body was doing exactly what their brain wanted it to do. No fear lag, no adrenaline hesitation, no moment of, oh God, this is happening between decision and action. I shot the nearest guard in the chemoreceptive organ because I'd spent 4 days learning that it was their most painful vulnerability. The guard dropped, screaming in a frequency that the other guards processed as threat signal. They turned toward me, all of them, away from the civilians. And Marin was behind them. She'd come from the opposite side through the main entrance, with Osel 3's sidearm and whatever else she'd collected on the way. She killed 3 before they registered her as a separate threat from me. Ghost materialized. I still don't know from where inside the guard perimeter, and did something to 2 more that I didn't see but heard, and the sounds were brief and wet and final. The remaining guards formed up. They were still soldiers, still Vareth, still the most tactically perfect warriors in the known galaxy. They formed a defensive cluster and prepared to fight the way they'd fought 100 battles against 100 rational enemies. But we weren't rational enemies. We were 3 psychopaths in a room full of civilians, and we moved in patterns that made no sense, attacked from angles that had no tactical basis, and took risks that no survival-oriented being would consider acceptable. I took a shot to the abdomen. It burned. Pain is information, I told myself. The information was, you have about 8 minutes of effective function before blood loss becomes deterministic. I adjusted my timeline accordingly. Marin took a shot through the hand and switched the weapon to the other hand, without breaking stride, without change in expression, without the flinch that the Vareth's models demanded she should produce. Ghost took no damage at all, as far as I could determine. Ghost simply existed in the spaces between the Vareth's predictions, occupying the blind spots of a species that had never had blind spots before. It was over in 90 seconds. Every guard in the habitation block was down. The atmospheric processor was inert. The dead man was dead. And 800 people were staring at us with expressions that I couldn't read because I've never been good at reading expressions. But I think it was the look of people who could not decide if they had been rescued or merely transferred to different captors. The woman with the 2 children was looking at me. The children were awake now, crying. She was holding them so tight that her arms shook. I was bleeding from the abdomen. My hands were covered in Vareth blood, which was darker than human blood, almost black. I was holding a weapon in each hand, standing over bodies, with an expression on my face that I'm told by people who've described it to me looks like nothing, like a mask that was never painted. I said, "We're Terran Consolidation. We're here to take you home." My voice, I'm told, sounded like I was reading a grocery list. The woman pulled her children closer and did not look away from me, and in her eyes I saw something that I recognized even though I shouldn't have been able to. She was calculating. Not whether I was safe, whether I was useful, whether the monster in front of her was a better monster than the ones on the floor. I respected that more than anything I'd encountered on that entire planet. We got them out. That's the short version. The long version involves Torin repurposing mining vehicles into transports, Dax carrying people with a broken leg because his body apparently didn't understand the concept of physical limitation, and Pell doing something to the Vareth's remaining garrison communications that convinced them reinforcements were coming from a direction that didn't exist, which bought us 4 hours. Vasek brought the Harrow into low orbit and we shuttled 800 civilians off Vareth 7 in groups of 60. It took 7 trips. Torin drove the transport for all 7. On the last trip, carrying the final group, a Vareth rapid response unit caught us on the Ridge Road. Voss stayed behind at the pass. I don't know exactly what Voss did. The rapid response unit was 20 soldiers. When the recovery team went back 3 days later, they found all 20 dead, and Voss sitting among them, dehydrated, covered in blood that was both colors, arranging something with the bodies that the recovery team's report described as a structure, and then said no more about. Voss was extracted. He never spoke again as far as I know. Not because he couldn't, because whatever had happened at the pass had completed something in him that language could not describe. He'd built his final architecture and had nothing left to say. The kid from Mars, the one whose pod we never found, they found him 2 months later, on a different continent, in a Vareth supply depot, alive. He'd been living off Vareth rations and had somehow learned enough of their language to trade with a Vareth supply clerk who had decided, independently, that the war was not worth dying for. The kid was 15. He'd survived alone on an alien-occupied world for 2 months by being, as near as anyone could determine, genuinely and completely without fear. His file still just says, incident. I was in surgery for 11 hours. The abdominal wound had nicked something important. The surgeons on the Harrow were not equipped for the procedure and had to improvise. I'm told I was awake for portions of it because the anesthesia kept failing. Something about my neurochemistry metabolizes sedatives at an unusual rate. I don't remember being awake. I remember being asleep, and in the sleep there was a room, and in the room there was the woman with the 2 children, and she was still calculating. When I woke up, Vasek was there. She looked at me for a long time. 7 of you went down, she said. 7 came back, and 800 civilians. 806, I said. 6 were born during the occupation. She blinked. You counted. I count things. Rask. Captain, what you did down there, what all of you did, I need to understand, was any of it? She didn't finish, but I knew the question. Was any of it human? Was any of it done for the right reasons? Was there a moment, any moment, where one of us acted out of compassion, out of love, out of the basic mammalian drive to protect our own species? I could have lied. I'm excellent at lying. I have studied human emotional expression the way an entomologist studies insects from the outside, with tools, through glass. I could have manufactured the answer she needed. No, I said. She flinched. I didn't do it because they were human. I did it because they were mine, inside my perimeter, part of my task. The distinction matters, Captain, because if you tell yourself I did it for noble reasons, you'll send people like me out again thinking there's a hero underneath. There isn't. There's a mechanism, and the mechanism works, but don't put a soul in it that isn't there. Vasek was quiet for a long time. The outcome is the same, she finally said. The outcome is always the same. A bullet doesn't care why you fired it. The dead don't care about your motives. And those 800 people are alive whether I love them or not. 806. 806. The Vareth Dominion sued for a localized ceasefire 3 weeks after Vareth 7. Not because of the casualties. 1,200 soldiers is a rounding error for a civilization that spans 40 systems. Because of the data. The Vareth analyzed our operation with the full processing power of their distributed intelligence network. They fed every sensor log, every biometric reading, every behavioral trace into their predictive models and asked the system to explain what had happened. The system returned an error I'm told has no precedent in Vareth computational history. Not unknown pattern. Not insufficient data. The system returned a classification that translates roughly as, this data describes an entity that should not exist, not shouldn't exist in a moral sense, in a mathematical sense. The Vareth predictive framework is built on a foundational axiom that all behavior is generated by a model, and all models can be reverse engineered from observed behavior. We broke the axiom. Not because we were randomness is modelable, because we were motivated by drives that the Vareth had no category for. The Vareth understand survival instinct, they understand territorial aggression, they understand rational self-interest, altruistic sacrifice, ideological commitment, and every other behavioral engine that evolution or culture can produce. They do not understand the thing that lives in a human who has been diagnosed as fundamentally broken by their own species, and yet still functions, still gets up, still acts, still completes the task in front of them for reasons that even they cannot articulate. The Vareth commander who negotiated the ceasefire asked a single question through the diplomatic channel. What is the cognitive architecture of the units you deployed to Vareth 7? The Terran Consolidation's official response was, standard human variation. This was technically true. We are human. We are a variation. And there is nothing about us that is not, in the strictest biological sense, standard. We are not augmented. We are not engineered. We are not drugged, programmed, or externally controlled. We are simply the part of the human distribution curve that the rest of humanity locks away because it doesn't know what else to do with us. The part that feels wrong. The part that moves wrong. The part that looks at a room full of terrified civilians and feels not compassion but possession, and acts on that feeling with a ferocity that compassion could never generate. We are humanity's shadow. And for 1 week on a gray world, the shadow was the only thing that worked. They debriefed us individually, separate rooms, separate analysts, separate everything because putting any two of us in the same space after an operation had been deemed counterindicated by the psychological team, which is the military's way of saying they were terrified we'd kill each other or bond, and they weren't sure which was worse. My debrief lasted 9 days. 9 days of questions from people who kept searching my answers for something they could hold on to, some glimmer of heroism, some buried empathy, some evidence that beneath the diagnosis there was a real human being doing real human things for real human reasons. I gave them nothing, not out of defiance, because there was nothing to give. On the 7th day, a new analyst arrived. Civilian. She had the look of someone who'd read my file and decided to meet me anyway, which meant she was either brave or had a theory she wanted to test. Mr. Rask, she said, I want to ask you about the woman, the one with the 2 children. What about her? You went to the habitation block before the dead man was neutralized, before Pell hit the frequency, before Torn disabled the processor. You were inside alone, with the guard still active and the kill system still hot. If anything had gone wrong, you would have died with the hostages. Yes. Why did you go in early? I thought about that. I'd been thinking about it for 7 days. Because if the others failed, I wanted to be there. To die with the hostages? No, to try anyway, even if the system was still live, even if it was hopeless. I wanted to be the one in the room. Why? Because someone should be in the room. She wrote something down. Her hand was steady. Mr. Rask, do you understand that what you're describing, the impulse to be present with people in danger, even at the cost of your own life, even without a plan, is generally categorized as a form of empathy? I'm aware of how you'd categorize it. And how would you categorize it? I was quiet for a long time. I counted the ceiling tiles. 14. I don't know, I said. I don't have a word for it. It doesn't feel like what people describe when they describe empathy. There's no warmth in it, no tenderness. It's more like gravity, like the room had mass and I was falling toward it and I couldn't not go. Could that be what empathy feels like for you? Not warm, not tender, just gravitational. I didn't answer. She didn't push. On the 9th day, they told me the operation had been classified, all records sealed, our identities scrubbed from every database except one, a file kept in a vault beneath the Terran Consolidation's headquarters, accessible only to the Secretary General and the Director of Emergency Acquisitions. They offered me a choice: return to Adrastea or remain available for future operations on a provisional basis, with modified confinement between deployments. Modified confinement, I said. Meaning what? A facility. Private, comfortable by most standards. Monitored, obviously, but not a prison. A cage with better furniture. Yes. I took it. Not because the furniture mattered, because the alternative was Adrastea, where the commissary served fish on Tuesdays, and I'd already counted every ceiling tile in every room I was allowed to enter. Marin took the same deal. Dax refused and went back to Adrastea, where I'm told he broke a guard's arm within the first week and was put in solitary, where he seemed, by all reports, content. Torin took the deal. Pell vanished literally. The facility they assigned her was found empty on the 3rd day, and she has not been located since. If you're listening to this from inside the consolidation, stop looking. You won't find her. She doesn't want to be found, and Pell's wants have a way of becoming facts. Ghost was never offered a choice because Ghost never appeared for the debrief. There is no record of Ghost boarding the Harrow. There is no record of Ghost existing at all, except for the bodies and the disconnected cables and the testimony of 6 people whose testimony is officially unreliable. Voss is in a facility that I'm told has no windows. He's still arranging things. Whatever he's building, he's not done yet. I'm in the facility now, the one with the better furniture. It's been, I'm not going to tell you how long. They'll use the timeline to identify me, and I'm not ready for that. I have a window. It faces a courtyard with a single tree. I've counted the branches, 47. I count them every morning. The number doesn't change, but the counting calms something in me that I still don't have a name for. The woman from the habitation block, the one with the 2 children, sent me a message. I don't know how she found out who I was. I don't know how she got the message through the classification barrier. I don't care about the how. I care about the message. It was one line. My children's names are Emmy and Soren, and they are alive because of you. I read it 11 times, not because I didn't understand it the first time, because each time I read it, the thing in my chest, the gravity, the pull, the unnamed weight got a little heavier. Not warmer, heavier. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it means I'm changing or if I've always been this and didn't have the data to identify it. I don't know if what I am is a broken version of what you are, or a different version, or a version that works by rules I haven't decoded yet. I know this. I killed people on Vareth 7. I killed them efficiently, without hesitation, without remorse. I would do it again. I will do it again. When they open the file and read my name and send the woman in the sharp-collared suit to tell me there's another gray world with another set of people who need a monster more than they need a hero. And I know this. I went into the room. Before the dead man was down. Before there was a plan. I went into the room because someone should be in the room. I don't know what that makes me. I don't think you do either. But Emmy and Soren are alive. They're alive because Earth reached into its darkest drawer and pulled out something that shouldn't work, something that breaks every model, something that even humanity itself can't look at directly. And it worked, not because it was good, not because it was noble, not because there was a soul in the machine, because it was there, because sometimes the thing that saves you isn't the thing you'd choose, it's the thing that chooses you. The broken clock that shouldn't tell time, telling time anyway, in a frequency that no one built it for. I count the branches every morning, 47, and the gravity gets heavier, and I still don't have a word for it. But I'm starting to think that's okay. End of transmission. File classification. Deep contact Vareth 7. Provisional conscription outcomes. Access. Secretary General / Director of Emergency Acquisitions only. Status. Active.